That was my outlet, my fantasy. Good things would happen because they always happened in the movie. So I never doubted that I wasn't going to somehow succeed.
She made America laugh for 11 straight years. She was the queen of the punchline, the empress of the pratfall. A woman so gifted at comedy that 30 million people rearranged their evenings just to watch her work. But in 1977, Carol Burnett stepped in front of the cameras and did something nobody saw coming. She stopped being funny. Deliberately, devastatingly. And the audience didn't laugh, they wept. The crew wept. Burnett herself wept. And nearly 50 years later, she still cannot bring herself to watch what she created that night. So what happened? What was so raw, so personal, so painfully honest that even the woman who made it refuses to look at it? Buckle up, because this story goes way deeper than television. The night the laughter died. It was February 12, 1977. The Carol Burnett Show was in its 10th season, already a cultural institution, already a keeper of Emmy Awards, already beloved by basically everyone in America who owned a television set. The show was known for its gloriously silly comedy sketches, Harvey Korman losing it mid-scene, Tim Conway torturing everyone with deliberately slow improvisation, and Burnett herself transforming into dozens of outrageous characters week after week. The studio audience came to laugh. The crew showed up, expecting to laugh. Carol Burnett, in theory, was there to make them laugh. That is not what happened. This particular episode featured a sketch from the recurring The Family segment, a darkly comic soap opera about a squabbling, suffocating Southern household. At the center of The Family was Eunice Higgins, a woman perpetually on the edge of a breakdown, drowning in crushed dreams and the suffocating disapproval of her battle-axe mother, Mama. Eunice was histrionic, loud, and desperately, achingly human. And on this night, Eunice was going to do something she had always dreamed of. She was going to be a star. The setup was a parody of the Gong Show, the real, wildly popular NBC game show where amateur performers competed for audience approval in front of a panel of celebrity judges, any of whom could slam a giant gong to end the act in public humiliation. It was broad, it was fun, and it was ripe for comedy. On paper, Burnett's version had every ingredient of a funny sketch. There were real celebrity judges brought in to play themselves, including Alan Ludden, the beloved host of Password, along with J.P. Morgan and Jamie Farr. And then Eunice walked out. She was trembling. She had the look of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror for 30 years. She smoothed her dress, faced those judges, and began to sing Feelings, that oversaturated, earnest, absolutely sincere ballad, with every ounce of her wounded soul. She was gonged, quickly, cruelly, definitively. No deliberation, no sympathy, just the clang of that massive gong, ringing out over the studio audience like a verdict. What happened next is the part that nobody on that set was prepared for. Burnett did not pivot to comedy. She did not play the humiliation for laughs. She stood there as Eunice, humiliated in front of a crowd, rejected in the one moment she had allowed herself to hope, and she fell apart. Not loudly, not theatrically, quietly, with the specific devastating grief of a person who never really believed they deserved to win in the first place. She didn't sob, she didn't rage, she just absorbed it, the way people absorb the rejection they were secretly expecting. And it was somehow so much worse than tears. The studio audience went silent. Crew members were seen wiping their eyes. Veteran cast members who had performed hundreds of sketches together were reportedly struggling to hold their composure off camera. Harvey Korman, who had notoriously spent much of his Carol Burnett show career cracking up and ruining takes, was perfectly, painfully still. Something was happening that went far beyond television, and everyone in the room could feel it. The cameras kept rolling, because what else could you do? You don't stop something like that. You just bear witness. The episode aired once. It earned critical acclaim, industry awards, and a reputation that only grew more legendary over time. And Carol Burnett, who made the whole thing happen, quietly, firmly, and permanently decided she would never watch it again. But what were they really watching that night? Was this just brilliant acting? Or was something far more personal bleeding through the screen? Meet Eunice, the character America couldn't look away from. Before we can understand why that 1977 sketch hit Carol Burnett like a freight train, we need to talk about Eunice Higgins. Because Eunice wasn't just a character, she was a slow-burning, brilliantly constructed portrait of a particular kind of American woman, one that millions of viewers recognized instantly, even if they'd never quite seen her on screen before. The family sketches first appeared on The Carol Burnett Show in the early 1970s, and they were immediately startlingly different from anything else on the show, while other segments leaned into broad parody or physical comedy. The family felt like something ripped from a Tennessee Williams play. The setting was a cramped, claustrophobic living room. The cast of characters was fixed: Eunice, Burnett, her long-suffering and dismissive husband Ed, Harvey Korman, and the indomitable, acid-tongued mama, Vicki Lawrence, in a performance that was both hilarious and genuinely terrifying. Eunice Higgins was a woman on fire. She was passionate, explosive, grandiose, and almost completely powerless. She had enormous dreams of fame, talent, and escape, and she lived her entire life in the iron grip of a woman who thought those dreams were ridiculous. In sketch after sketch, we watched Eunice fight for an inch of dignity in a household that seemed specifically designed to deny it to her. She wore the same olive-green floral dress every single episode. She was the kind of woman who cried at Monopoly. She was never, ever cool, and yet she was never, ever defeated. She kept showing up. She kept insisting she mattered. That is why audiences loved her so ferociously. There was something uncomfortably honest about Eunice. The feeling of watching a real person, not a punchline. Vicki Lawrence, who played Mama, has spoken about how the sketches operated on multiple levels simultaneously. They were funny, yes, but they were also about the specific cruelty families inflict on each other in the name of love. Harvey Korman once described the set during the family shoots as having a different energy from the rest of the show. More focused, more electrically tense. And at the center of all of it, every single time, was Burnett. Completely disappeared inside this woman. Not a wink to the audience, not a safety valve of ironic distance. Just Eunice, raw and real and furious and heartbroken, every single week. The Gong Show sketch was not the first time the family had made people uncomfortable, but it was the first time it made an entire studio cry. And when you understand who Eunice really was, who she was modeled on, what she represented, the reason becomes devastatingly clear. So who, exactly, was Eunice Higgins? And why did playing her cost Carol Burnett so much more than anyone watching at home could have imagined? Too real to watch. The wound beneath the punchline. Here is what Carol Burnett has said in multiple interviews across multiple decades about that 1977 episode. It was too real. She has said it simply, without elaboration. the way people talk about things they've accepted, but not resolved. I know what's there. I don't need to see it again to remember how it felt. That is not something a person says about a performance they're merely proud of. That is the language of someone describing an open wound they've learned to live around. The connection between Eunice Higgins and Carol Burnett herself is not a secret. Burnett has discussed it openly. Eunice was partly drawn from people Burnett observed growing up, women of a certain generation and circumstance who had genuine talent, genuine longing, and zero infrastructure to support any of it. Women who dreamed loudly in houses where dreaming was considered a character flaw. Women who were gonged, not on a game show, but in life, repeatedly, by the very people who were supposed to love them. In the Gong Show sketch, Eunice doesn't just fail. She fails publicly, in the one arena where she believed she might finally be seen. She sings feelings with the desperation of someone who has spent their whole life trying to feel something other than diminished, and she is dismissed anyway. The judges don't even hesitate. The gong comes down fast and indifferent, the way rejection so often does. Not with malice, just with a casual cruelty that's somehow worse. Burnett has acknowledged that this particular sketch struck terrifyingly close to her own psychology. The fear of public humiliation, the desperate need to be recognized as more than what your circumstances suggested, the creeping, lifelong dread that maybe the people who laughed at your ambitions were right all along. Critics were unanimous. This was one of the boldest, most emotionally courageous moments in the history of American television. The Hollywood foreign press took note. The Television Academy took note. The episode was praised as proof that a comedy sketch could do what drama rarely managed: strip a human being down to their most essential, most exposed self, and ask the audience to sit with that exposure rather than laugh it away. But Carol Burnett couldn't sit with it. Not then, and not in the nearly 50 years since. There's a specific quality to the things we create that cuts closest to the bone. They feel like a violation of privacy, even when we're the ones who created them. Burnett gave something in that sketch that she has never quite been willing to look at directly since. She's acknowledged the praise. She's understood the significance. But watching it back would mean watching herself be Eunice and watching Eunice be her. And that, apparently, is a journey she has never been willing to take. The question is, what experience in Carol Burnett's real life was so devastating, so formative, that it lived inside her for decades and finally found its way out on a February night in 1977? Little Carol, from Hollywood, a childhood nobody would wish for. Carol Creighton Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. And if you want to understand everything that came after, you need to spend a little time in the world she was born into. Both of her parents were alcoholics. That is not gossip or tabloid color. Burnett has spoken about it plainly and persistently for her entire adult life. In memoirs, in interviews, in conversations designed specifically to help other children of alcoholics understand that what happened to them was not their fault. Her parents divorced when she was very young, and then separately relocated to Hollywood, chasing the dream of the movies the way so many people did in that era. What they found, like so many people found, was something considerably less glamorous than the posters promised. Carol was left in the care of her maternal grandmother, Mabel Eudora White, a woman she called Nanny, and who became the defining relationship of her early life. Nanny was on welfare. They lived in a single-room apartment in a boarding house in one of Hollywood's shabbier pockets, her mother down the hall in the same building, close enough to visit, but not close enough to raise her. The Great Depression still had its fingers in everything. They didn't have much. Nanny reportedly stole silverware from restaurants so her grandchildren would have something to eat with. They took rolls of toilet paper home from the movie theater because they couldn't afford to buy it. And yet, and this is the thing about Carol Burnett that makes her story more complicated than simple tragedy, there was love in that apartment. Nanny adored her, took her to the movies every week, made her feel, in Burnett's own words, like the most important person in someone's world. The cinema became Carol's education and her escape simultaneously. She watched Lucille Ball. She watched Judy Garland. She watched women who were funny and bold and alive, in a way that the women around her never got to be. She filed it all away. Her father, sweet, defeated, funny in the way that drunks sometimes are, drifted in and out. He died in a charity hospital, ravaged by tuberculosis and years of alcoholism, shortly after Carol left for New York to pursue her dreams. He had asked her to save him a ticket to her first Broadway show. She never got to deliver it. Her mother, who was beautiful and romantic and completely unable to take care of herself or her daughter, died at 46. Her father also died at 46. Both of them were consumed by the same disease. Burnett has said that, as a child, she blamed herself for her parents' drinking, the way children always do. It took decades and considerable reflection to reach the understanding that it had nothing to do with her at all. It was a childhood that left marks. The specific mark of being a child who is loved inadequately. The specific mark of watching your parents disappear into something you can't fight or fix. The specific mark of growing up in a place where glamour lived on the other side of an impossible wall, visible enough to ache for, far enough away to feel like a taunt. Sound familiar? It should, because every single one of those marks found its way into Eunice Higgins. Every ounce of that longing, every gram of that humiliation, every desperate inch of that needs to be seen. How did a girl from a Hollywood boarding house, raised on welfare and movie tickets, become the woman who hosted her own show for 11 seasons? The answer is stranger and more wonderful than you might expect. From welfare checks to 11 seasons of gold. Getting out of that boarding house was not a straightforward story of talent meeting opportunity. It never is. Carol Burnett attended Hollywood High School, where she discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was funny. Not just funny at the right moment, but funny on purpose, with timing and precision, and the ability to read a room and give it exactly what it needed. She started performing at school and realized that the very quality that had made her childhood lonely, her sensitivity, her ability to feel things too much, was actually a gift in front of an audience. She enrolled at UCLA on a scholarship, initially studying journalism before switching to theater arts. She was good. She was disciplined. She was also broke. The story of how she got to New York is one of Hollywood's most endearing legends. A mysterious millionaire approached her after a performance, offered her and her boyfriend an interest-free loan of $1,000 each. On 3 conditions: she must never reveal his name. She must use the money to go to New York. And if she became successful, she must help other young artists. She agreed to all 3. She has kept all 3. New York moved fast for her. She lived in a boarding house for single women, not so different from the one she'd grown up in, but this one was full of ambitious young actresses rather than worn-down families, and she started working. Small parts, off-Broadway productions, the grind. Then came Once Upon a Mattress in 1959, an off-Broadway show that transferred to Broadway and made her a star overnight. Lucille Ball was in the audience on the second night. Ball came backstage. The two women became lifelong friends. The Gary Moore Show followed, giving Burnett her television legs and her first Emmy. And then, in 1967, after years of network skepticism about whether audiences would watch a variety show hosted by a woman, The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS. 11 seasons, more than 270 episodes, 25 Emmy Awards, 30 million viewers a week at its peak. Tim Conway, Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence. Guest stars who ranged from Bing Crosby to Steve Martin to Rock Hudson. It was, by any measure, one of the greatest variety programs in the history of American television, and Burnett ran it with the discipline of someone who understood exactly how rare and precious the whole thing was. The show's format was partly inspired by her own instincts about performance, different characters every week, different wigs and costumes, no repetition, no stagnation. She had learned from the movies that kept her company in that boarding house apartment. She built something that felt like all of them at once. And she kept it running, and kept it excellent, with the kind of ferocious ownership that only comes from someone who knows exactly what poverty looks and feels like. She was not going to waste this. Not for anything. The show also became a safe haven, a place where Burnett mentored younger talent with the generosity of someone who had once desperately needed a mentor herself. Vicki Lawrence, who became Mama on the Family sketches, was 18 years old when Burnett fought to get her cast. She had almost no professional experience. Burnett didn't care. She knew what she saw. That mentorship produced one of the great comic partnerships in television history. And the two women have been close friends for more than 5 decades since, through fallings out and reconciliations, and everything that comes with that kind of long, tangled bond. The Gong Show sketch landed in the middle of all this extraordinary run, in the final years of the show's life, when everyone involved was at the absolute peak of their powers. And perhaps that's part of what made it so shattering. At the height of her success, Carol Burnett looked directly into the wound that had made her, and then put it on television. But what happened after the show ended? What did Carol Burnett do with all that power, all that grief, and all those unforgettable characters she had built and given away to the world? After the curtain, loss, spin-offs, and a career that refuses to quit. The Carol Burnett Show ended in 1978, 11 seasons after it began. Burnett chose to end it. She has always been clear about that, noting that she wanted to leave while it was still unambiguously great, rather than stay until the decline. It was the right call. It is also, if you think about it, exactly the kind of disciplined, unsentimental decision that Eunice Higgins could never have made. In the years that followed, the Eunice character took on a life of its own. In 1982, CBS aired a television movie simply titled Eunice, exploring the character in a more dramatic, extended format. And it was extraordinary. Burnett committed fully to the tragedy of this woman, the kind of performance that reminded critics what they'd been watching all those years on the variety show. That TV movie eventually inspired a sitcom, Mama's Family, starring Vicki Lawrence as Mama, which ran from 1983 to 1990. Burnett appeared in early episodes of Mama's Family, and then she stepped away and did not return for the second run of the show in syndication. The reasons are layered and complicated. There was the matter of her divorce from producer Joe Hamilton in 1984, an acrimonious split that made the whole production a painful place to be, given that Hamilton owned the rights to the characters. Burnett has said the tone of the sitcom didn't feel right to her, that Mama's Family was missing the darkness, and the emotional complexity that had made the family sketches so powerful. And so she walked away from Eunice Higgins, the character she had built from the inside out, the character that was, in some fundamental way, the most honest thing she had ever created. While all of that was happening on screen, the real Carol Burnett was living through the hardest years of her life. Her daughter Carrie, her eldest, her look-alike, the girl who had inherited her mother's talent and her family's demons, developed a serious addiction to substances such as alcohol as a teenager. Burnett has spoken with extraordinary candor about what it was like to watch her daughter disappear into the same disease that had taken her parents. The guilt, the helplessness, the terrible calculus of loving someone who is destroying themselves. She and Joe Hamilton eventually went public with Carrie's struggles, both to get their daughter help and to use their experience to help other families facing the same crisis. Carrie got sober. She rebuilt. She became an actress and a writer of considerable talent. She and her mother co-wrote a play together, Hollywood Arms, adapted from Burnett's memoir of her childhood. The play was still in development when, on January 20, 2002, Carrie Hamilton died. She was 38 years old, pneumonia, as a complication of lung and brain cancer. Burnett has said she thinks about Carrie every single day. She established the Carrie Hamilton Theater at the Pasadena Playhouse in her daughter's memory. She wrote a book, Carrie and Me, a mother-daughter love story, that became a New York Times bestseller. She carries the loss with the same quiet, undefeated dignity with which she has carried everything else. In her late career, Burnett has continued to work with the selectivity and the quality consciousness of someone who knows exactly what they have earned. Her guest arc on Better Call Saul was critically celebrated. Her role in the Apple TV Plus series Palm Royale earned her an Emmy nomination in 2024, making her, at 91 years old, the oldest ever nominee in that category. She appeared in Hacks in 2025. She has never stopped. She has never coasted. But through all of it, the spin-offs, the heartbreak, the awards, the losses, there is one tape she has never watched, one performance she has never revisited, one Eunice sketch from a February night in 1977 that she has never been able to bring herself to press play on. After everything we've learned, does the reason finally make complete sense? Why she still won't press play, and what that tells us about all of us. Let's be honest about something. Carol Burnett is not a fragile person. This is a woman who was raised in poverty by a grandmother on welfare. A woman who lost both parents to alcoholism before she turned 30. A woman who watched her daughter spiral into addiction at 13 and made the brutal, loving decision to get her help even when it cost her the relationship, temporarily. A woman who built one of the most successful variety shows in television history from scratch on the back of her own talent and discipline in an industry that was deeply skeptical of women in the driver's seat. A woman who survived a devastating divorce and the death of her child and has still, at 91 years old, never once stopped showing up. She is not someone who avoids things because they are hard. She avoids that one episode because it is something specific and different from hard. It is her. When Burnett says that the Gong Show sketch was too real, she is not being falsely modest or dramatically coy. She means it with clinical precision. In that performance, she was not acting the way she normally acted, deploying craft, inhabiting a character, maintaining the essential separation between performer and role that allows you to go to dark places and then come home safely afterward. In that performance, she was being Eunice in the deepest possible way, using the character as a vehicle for every feeling she had spent her entire life learning to contain. the desperate longing for recognition, the specific humiliation of being publicly dismissed, the ache of someone who grew up being told, not always in words, but in every possible way that matters, that their dreams were too big for the life they came from. All of it came out on that stage in 1977, in front of 30 million people, with nowhere to hide. Critics called it one of the boldest moments in American television history. They were right. It was also the most personally costly thing Carol Burnett ever did in front of a camera, more costly, in some ways, than anything that happened off of one. There's a particular cruelty to being seen too completely. Most of us build our entire adult lives around not being seen too completely. We curate, we perform, we present versions of ourselves that are acceptable, palatable, safely edited. Burnett spent her career being brilliantly, generously funny, sharing the parts of herself that could be packaged as entertainment. And then one night, the packaging came off. Watching that tape would mean confirming something she has already accepted but does not need to re-experience. That Eunice Higgins was not just a character. That somewhere deep in the architecture of that woman, the olive green dress, the failed auditions, the crushed dreams, the mother who never quite believed in her, lived every single thing that Carol Burnett had spent her life running toward and away from simultaneously. She has earned the right not to look at it. And in some strange way, the refusal itself is a kind of proof. Proof that what happened in that studio on February 12, 1977 was not merely great television. It was a human being, briefly, entirely, and irreversibly herself. That is what 50 million words of craft and 50 years of distance cannot quite explain. And that is why, of all the extraordinary things Carol Burnett has given us, the one she keeps for herself might be the most extraordinary of all. And that, right there, is the Carol Burnett story that nobody talks about enough. The one that lives underneath all the Tarzan yells and the curtain dresses and the legendary bloopers. A woman who turned a childhood full of absence into 50 years of extraordinary presence. Who poured the most painful parts of herself into a character named Eunice, and then gave that character one devastating, unguarded moment in 1977 that became television history, who still, to this day, keeps that performance locked somewhere private, not because she's ashamed of it, but because some truths are too naked to revisit. If this story hit you in the chest the way it hit us, subscribe right now, because next week, we are going somewhere equally jaw-dropping. You will not want to miss it.